compared to most of mine, this is the Word document is only 7 pages. Most of them are around 20 or so, something like that. All we're doing is putting some holes in the thing we made. So this is what we made last time, body side. We got a little pocket there. And even that's pretty simple, but as you know, if you remember the way we built that, it was a little, I don't want to say complicated, but it was kind of an odd little procedure we did where we made a tube and then we did a reflect line and then we built a long extension onto that. So even that, as simple as it looks, that took some time, but what we're doing today is just punching 3 holes in it, in that pocket. One's kind of like a keyed hole, or looks like a letter D there. I don't know if you can see it, but there's 2 little tiny holes next to it. So all we're doing is making solids. You can see right there on the left, those highlighted in orange, those are the solid pieces we're gonna make, which are really just tubes. 2 little tiny tubes there for the holes, and then this is actually a bigger tube that we're gonna slice off to give it kind of a flat-sided keyed shape. You hear that term a lot, keyed. And then we just trim it with that. So there's really not that much to it. A lot of it's just what data are we using to make those things, right? So, like I said, I'm just gonna demonstrate. So I opened up, and today we don't even have to get into the Class A assembly, right? A lot of the stuff we've done so far, we're bouncing between the Class A assembly and then our body side assembly. Here we're just picking up where we left off last week. All I opened up was the assembly body side. Immediately I activated or made the work part, the body side. So that's our part that we're actually doing the real part in. And in there, it says, we did this last week. We added some feature groups in here, like a trim feature group, and inside the trim feature group there was another one called fuel filler cutout, but we didn't do anything with it last week. We made these feature groups last week, I'm pretty sure we did, yeah. And then it just says, open up the body side, go to the part navigator, make the feature group called fuel filler cutout, make that active, right? And again, that's not the same as saying make it the current feature, right? Current feature is different than active. Current feature is make current feature, and that makes it bold, which means whatever I create will come after that, right? Feature groups can be made current. There is a make current feature like that. That made it bold, but that's not the same as active. Active, it turns green. And active means whatever you create next will go inside that feature group. So that term active only works for feature groups. Right now, if I were to make anything, plain, CSIS right now, it wouldn't go in that feature group, it would go right after it, because it's current. And actually, that one being current means the one above it, its parent has to be active. That's the one that's green. That's not the one I want to be green. And I'm just going over this, it's just basic stuff. This isn't really anything to do with today's project. Well, you do have to make that one active, fuel filler cutout. If it's green like that, then you know you made it active. And that means whatever I create next will go inside that little folder, okay? So then we're gonna create the cutout geometry. It's gonna start out as a tube like this, right here, okay? In a tube, if you remember the tube command, you start out with I'd call it a center line, but they call it a path. And it's basically circular or cylindrical. Well, not cylindrical if it's a curved center line. So we're going to use that center line that we've been using all along here. This guy, that's going to be the center of it, the path. Okay. But it wants us to come up with, I guess I'll just show it to you, the size of that tube, and therefore that hole, the keyed hole. The idea is we don't want it to be as wide as the pocket. We want it to be on both sides 10 mils short of this, where this is kind of a flat right here. That's a flat piece. And then there's a fillet, and then there's that's the walls of the pad the pocket that we made before. That's actually that wall extension. So we want the hole itself to be 10 mils inside of this edge, or the outer edge of this thing, right? 10 mils on both sides, which, you know, if that was the diameter going across, we'd want it 10 mils short on this side, 10 mils short on that side. So it's kind of hard to see in that picture, but right here you can sort of see that, right? It's not quite that tube is not quite as big as the whole pocket. So to get to that, like I said, we're going to use the tube command. That's under surface. The more button, here's tube. Okay. I was playing with it before, and I must have, the last time I made a tube, I must have linked it, the outer diameter to something because it's gray, right? There's a number there and it says equal, so I must have already linked it to something the last time. That's like another NX thing, right? If you do an extrude or a tube or a lot of functions, a lot of commands, it remembers what you used last time. So if you link to something last time and you go to make a new one, it's going to use that same value here. A good habit, that's why I keep saying this, a good habit is, you know, I don't remember what that's from, but I want to reset this window. Remember the little reset up on the top? That's a good habit. Every time you go into a command, reset it. Then it says, okay, then we're just going to go back to some defaults, like a 1 millimeter diameter, and that's it. It's not linked to anything. Now, there are also times when you do want it to remember what you did last time, so then you just don't reset it, just use the same number. Anyway, so it wants me to pick a path. I'm going to pick that center line that we linked to way back when, that thing right there. And I guess I'll say this, the tube, it doesn't ever ask us for a length. It asks us for a diameter, but not a length, because when you pick the path, or what I would call the center line, the tube is always as long as that, whatever that is. And I don't know if you remember, we made that, I think it was 150 in both directions. Okay, basically from that circle we made a long time ago, right in the middle of this. So just keep that in mind. It's about 100, well, it's really 300 mils in length. About 150 in both directions from where that line meets this big slab. That'll come into play in a minute. For the thickness or the diameter of this thing, it says, we're going to do a measure, like I said. I forgot what I was doing. I want to measure how far it is from here to the edge. Okay, that's another reason I want to demo this, because remember, the measure tool is different than what you're used to. When you were, all the classes we had before was NX11, this is NX2212. The measure tool is quite a bit different. So I want to measure, so I'm going to go to this little pull down here, and there's a measure. It's not exactly like CATIA, you know, if you remember from my CATIA classes, any of you that were in them, every time you do a measure on the fly, I always said, make sure you turn off keep measure, but they don't have anything like that here. There isn't a setting in measure for turning off associativity, but when you're doing it on the fly like this, I guess it doesn't let you turn it off. But it's okay. It's going to be associative at first, but ultimately, in my instructions, I don't really tell you if it should be or not. Matter of fact, if I look at the picture here, this is like the result of the measure. You can see it's gray, so it's kind of, and there's an equal sign, so it is kind of, it's kind of implying in my instructions that it's going to be linked, and that's okay. So it really doesn't matter for what we're doing. But here's that measure command. That's different than what you're used to, like I said. Depending on what you did last in this one, it might be on point here. And if it's on point, well, then I can't measure a center line. I can measure the endpoints, but I can't measure the line. So another thing I could do here is reset, because by default, what you're trying to measure is an object by default. And what's an object? Well, it could be a line, it could be a face, it could be an edge. So that's what we want. So I want to measure from this center line, and again, I said it a few times. In there you see, it says the length is 300. Remember this measure tool, the new measure tool? As soon as you pick something, it's giving you information about it. I didn't really care about the length, but it's telling me that. Okay, it's better than not enough information. But the next thing would be to pick the edge. You gotta be careful. I'm still on the face, the whole thing's highlighted. Make sure you get on the edge just like that. And if you're having a hard time, wait for the 3 dots. Then make sure you pick edge in the little quick pick window. And mine says 64.5656. Every one of ours is gonna be a little bit different, because all this goes back to that circle we all made in the very beginning of this whole underbody assignment, the very first assignment. We all drew a circle roughly on 3 points, and everybody did it slightly different. So your number's probably gonna be different than mine, right? But mine, it should be something close to that, 64, 65, 63, something like that. So that's the number, okay? I'm gonna hit okay, and just like other softwares, it came back to where I was. It was in the outer diameter, okay? And because it was linked, there's a measure, like a little ruler right there. So I'm gonna take that number, but the thing is, what I measured from the center of a circle to the circle, that's called the radius. That's half of the hole, right? Well, this tool uses diameter. So basically, I gotta double that to get the real diameter, right? So I gotta make a little formula. So and just another FYI, if I was kind of saying this makes a linked measure. If all I wanted was that measure, but I didn't want it to be linked, remember, anytime you got a link, it's gray in here, anytime it's gray, and you just want to break the link, you can go down here to make constant. Make constant just turns it into a number, it's not linked to anything. So now it doesn't remember that I measured, okay? We didn't really have to do that in this case, but just want to remind you that. I do want to go to the formula field though, because like I said, I got to double that. It's actually, I measured the radius, but I need to know the diameter, right? So that's 2 times that. But I also have to add to my formula the fact, like I said before, I don't want it to go all the way to the ends where that edge is. I want it to be 10 mils less from that edge. I'm trying to make this bigger and zoom in. Okay, I want that there's a little gap there, a little flat area where the end of the tube is to where that fillet really starts, that edge. So I want that to be 10, okay? Well, again, that's 10 on one side. So that means 10 on the other side because it's the diameter. So that really means the diameter, so that measurement I got times 2, that's the diameter. If I want it to be 10 from the sides on both sides, that means I gotta measure 20, or subtract 20 in total. Hopefully it makes sense. I think that makes sense. Okay, and the number should be, well, it didn't look like it did anything there, did it? I didn't hit, maybe it didn't hit enter, yeah. That's what it did. I didn't hit enter. Oh, you know what? You know what's throwing me off? Because I got so many decimal places there, it's probably actually showing the formula right now in that window. I just don't see it. I see a 64.565555, whatever. If I hover over it though, maybe even if I don't hover over it. Let me do the preview. I don't know why sometimes it should show the final number. Let me just. I mean, it is. I mean, you can see when I hit preview, that's the right size. I don't know why it's not showing it correctly there. I suppose if I made this, no, that doesn't help. So it is the right number. And it's 10 mils short on each side because it was a diameter. I had to subtract 20 from the whole thing. All right, anyway, a lot of times to talk about creating that little thing. And the number, let me look at what my number was. See, it's still showing. That's weird how it's showing that.
Can you put your cursor up there? Just see if it'll go to the right.
Oh,
see the formula?
Yeah.
There it is.
It is showing it, but I don't know why it's not. Usually it shows it when you first do it, and then you preview it and you come back, and it usually just shows the final result. That's kind of odd, but it is right. I don't know. I wish it didn't show it like that. Because in my picture, see, it's 109.1. So it should be around 109 something when you do it. Well, or another way of saying it is, it should look like that. There's a little bit of gap on each side. All right. So anyway, I want to run away from that. I'm tired of that one. The next thing we're going to do is slice off one side of this. Right now it's cylindrical. We're going to slice it off so it almost looks like a D shape, or another name for that is it's a keyed opening. Keyed, K-E-Y-E-D, keyed opening. And we're going to come up with where that slice is going to be. Okay. and I've just given you a number. We're making it at 30 mils from the center line of this. Right, so from the center line of this, 30 mils this way, I'm going to make a surface that slices off a chunk of my cylindrical tube, right? Well, to make that parallel, so I gotta, basically I'm gonna extrude a straight line. I need a line back here somewhere that's 30 mils from the center of this. Make a long story short, we had a nice flat surface back here before that we could work with, but it got trimmed when we made this. Right? Remember, there was a flat surface. We made that was a long extension. that guy right there, if I go back in time, it was that flat surface there, right there. Okay. But we're not back in time anymore. We're back to the future here. We're still in the fuel filler cutout. So I'll make that the current feature because I just made that, right? So that back wall is not a nice flat surface. It's trimmed up. So we need a copy of it, okay? I think we've talked about this in this class. I know I did in other classes. That original extrude right here, it got consumed. We need to make another copy of it. You right click on it, and it's called extract body here. That's gonna temporarily say, well, if you wanna extract it here, it's gonna put it right after this guy in the tree. To put it in there, this feature group above has to be active, so it's gonna temporarily make it active to make that, okay? It only temporarily did. It just, that little message said, well, this has to be active for an instant just to put it in there, so it did. It went back to what I made active. But it did create this extracted body. I don't remember if I have you name it. No, it's one of the few things I don't make you rename. So there's an extracted body. Anyway, it's a nice flat surface, okay? If you recall, we, let's see what I had to do. Yeah, remember this line we made in the form group back a while ago? Did I not rename mine? I think it's these guys. Yeah, I made some lines and I didn't rename them, I should have. That was the Z line, or that's the X line, that was the Z line. It was called Z direction line and X direction line. So I've got that line, and I want to parallel it over this way, 30 mils, because then I'm going to use that parallel as my, to make my extrusion. Then I'm going to chop away that keyed shape. I'm talking and reading at the same time, that's why I'm stumbling here. So I'm going to do a parallel. We call that offset in face. Okay. I'm going to offset that curve, my Z direction line, on that face, 30 mils. Where do we get that number? Well, I just give it to you. It might be a number, it's obviously a specification for the opening where we're going to, when you put the fuel in the, when you go to the gas station, you put the fuel nozzle in there. That's a number that was given to us by somebody, so that's the number we're using. Okay. So I got a line over there. We are going to do something similar because we're also going to make a couple of holes here for the hinge. We're not really going to make a hinge, but the hinge mounts to the back of this. Okay, but we're gonna use a line similar to that one, just a little bit further over. So I got that line. Then it says let's extrude that line. Do I name that? Nope, I don't name that. I don't name that either. So we're going to extrude that. I'm going to go Home tab, go to the extrude command. I don't really tell you to do this. I just say create an extrude of the curve we just made, this one. But a good thing to do would be to come down here to the body type and set it to sheet. It will be a sheet even if I leave it on solid because it's an open profile. Remember that concept? But it's a good habit to, if you want it to be a sheet, even if the system's going to make it a sheet, you tell it to be a sheet, just in case things change down the road. All right. For the direction of this extrude, by default, it was using, I think, the X direction. I'm going to use the center line again. Sometimes it's hard to pick that. Right? I can see it. There it is. I'm going to extrude it like that, and it tells me to make it a distance of 170 in outboard, which is to our left, 170 this way, and 140 the other way. Well, the way that arrow's going, the start distance. Let's try it. Let me do 170. Let's try minus 170. Yeah, that's the one I wanted. So the 170 is going to go this way. Okay. The other way is going to be 140, like that. All right. Remember what I said just a minute ago? That line was 300 mils in length, the center line. So the tube was 300 mils in length. All I'm doing is making sure that that new surface I want to trim with is a little bit longer than the tube. So the 170 this way, I had to use some numbers. I had to come up with some numbers that would do it just right. So it's a little bit longer in the back, a little bit longer in the front. The reason I had to finagle some numbers that worked, I mean, you could always just make it a lot longer. If it's not long enough to go through the tube, you can make it longer than 170 and 140. But it's because that line, the original line we all made, that center line, it started at the main slab and went 150 that way and 150 that way. But the This extrude I'm making right now, it's not starting at the main slab, it's starting on that back flat wall, so it's a little bit to the rear of it. So that's why this way is 140, that way is 170. Again, you don't have to understand really what I'm talking about too much. I just wanted to make sure it was long enough in both directions to be longer than that tube, because we're gonna use it to trim that tube. And if it isn't long enough, you'll say, you can't trim the tube because that's not long enough. I even have in my note here, the extrude should be slightly longer in both directions than the tube. Okay. I just took a lot longer to say that. Now we're gonna do a trim body. I'm in the home tab. Trim body is right here. Okay, I'm gonna trim the target, my solid tube, as the tool. I'm gonna pick that. I wanna get rid of that left side in this orientation. It's already doing it by default. I'll hit okay. I don't need to see this anymore. Okay, so there's that keyed shape. Of course, we want to soften it up a little bit. Right now, it's got a hard corner right here. I'm going to hide that line too. Okay, we're going to soften those up. We'll put a couple of edge blends on it. 10 mil edge blend on those two resulting hard edges. Okay, there's two of them. 10 mils. Okay. And then we finally got our complete piece that we're going to use to subtract the fuel filler cutout. You know what, all these things, oh no, they're right. No, they're not right. These things, I didn't have the right set, or the feature group active. Should have been that one. So these things I just made, they should have been in the fuel filler cutout. They're not. Let's see if I can just grab them. The tube was in there, but everything I did after that wasn't in there. I just put them inside there, there we go. That's how it should have been. I should have made this green when I made those last few things. But I didn't. Well, it's okay. It's too late now. So I gotta, oh, I do gotta name that though, that last edge blend. See, I knew I had to name something for you. Can't make it too easy. Fuel filler, nozzle, trim body. All right. So that's a main piece we're gonna use to trim it, but we're also gonna have a couple of holes. So again, the whole idea is we're gonna have an opening for when you're pumping gas, where the nozzle goes, but we're also gonna have a couple of holes because theoretically there's gonna be a hinge. We're not making it in this project, but there'd be a hinge there, so when the door opens and closes, it's on a hinge. So we're gonna make a couple of holes for that hinge. Kind of the same process, okay, but I have a feature group called holes. So I'm gonna make that active before I get going. Now we're gonna make, here we made a giant cylinder tube right in the middle of that. Now I want to make a couple of small tubes where I want these holes to be. So start off with a offset curve and face of that same original Z direction line that we had on that same flat face, that extracted body we made. It's going the wrong way for some reason on that one. And then this is going to be 43.5. Why? Well, because I gave you that information. That's what we were given. 43.5. That's based on the hinge. Realistically, we would, we would have a hinge, maybe some hinge data there, some fastener, or some point information from where the hinge connects up there, and we would use that. We're just giving you the number, 43.5. Okay. So the holes are going to be somewhere on this line, which I just made. To make the holes, I'm going to parallel this guy. This is the X direction line. Parallel that up, parallel that down. And when I have you do it in the instructions, I have you do this. You parallel this up, make an intersection point, and then make a tube. Then we parallel it down, make an intersection point, and then make a tube. You don't have to do it in that order. You can parallel it up and parallel it down, then make a point, then make a point, then make a tube, then make a tube. You do whatever method you want. But I have you do the first tube all the way in one sequence, and then I have you do the other one. It basically says repeat that for the other one. Anyway, here's that sequence, right? So I want to start with a point where those are already meeting. So if I go to the curve tab, here's point. I'm gonna do an intersection point. Where those two lines meet, there's my old X direction line, there's the parallel or the offset I just made. Make sure you go to the second field in there. So there's a point right there. It's kind of hard to see it because it's a plus right on top of the two blue lines. But now I'm going to take that point and move it up the parallel curve using point on curve. Okay, I'm gonna move it on this curve. By default, this is usually set to start of curve. I don't wanna measure from the start of the curve. I wanna measure from a specific location, so I'm gonna have it on start point. I need to pick the start point. Good habit would be, wait for the 3 dots. Make sure you pick existing point, okay? Now this one's pointing downward. I do need one downward, but in my instructions I have you do the upward one first, so not that it matters, you can reverse it. You can do them in any order. And again, the length of this is just based on information we know about the hinge, 27.5 up, right there. That's where the hole's supposed to be. Okay. And again, if I was doing this for real, I'd probably make the second point right now, because I was in the point command, I would have just kept doing it. But instead, I have you make another little line right here, and we're gonna basically build a tube like we did here. It was based on a center line, right? So I'm gonna go to the line command. Let's see, we could do this a few different ways. How do I know? I'm supposed to name that point, but I'll do it later, as far as you know. Oh yeah, well I'm gonna create a line, starting at that point I just made. The end point, we're gonna say add an angle. I could do it normal to that back surface, or I could do it the same direction as that center line. And I do need to see that center line in the middle. Thought I had my, oh yeah, I do have it. See, I have these little boxes turned on here. For the direction of the line, I want to pick the center line of this, the main center line. And if I move my cursor around, I can see it like that. You might not be able to see it, but I have a couple of, I'll show you these in a minute. I have these things here that says allow selection of hidden wireframe and highlight hidden edges. But that one right there, allow selection of hidden wireframe. It allows you to do that if you kind of roughly know where it is, like that, right there. So if you don't have those little symbols, I'll show you in a second where they are. But anyway, I got the line kind of the direction I want it to go. It's starting at that little point in the same direction as the center line of my main piece, my main opening. And then for the lengths, we're gonna go minus 30 and 30. I got both at minus 30 right now, I don't think it likes that. Oh, you know what, the first one was minus 30, but it didn't like it because the second one was minus 30. So anyway, it's gonna go up 30 that way and out 30 that way. The length of that is not critical. We're giving ourselves a little bit of leeway, but anyway, there's a line. Okay, so I got a little line there. And yes, if I was following my instructions, I would immediately go to the tube command. Make a tube on that line with a radius of 7. I'm sorry, a diameter of 7. How do we know? Because I told you. Okay, so there's that one. All right. Just real quick before I forget, I mentioned these guys. This button that allows you to select hidden wireframe. Well, you got to have that turned on in order to do what I did. So that way I didn't have to hide this thing because it was in the way. I'll just remind you of something. If you don't have all these buttons up here, or there's buttons that you knew I had up there and you don't have them, you know, like my favorite, deselect all, that's up there. This is the top border bar. Just like any other area of the ribbon up here, there's a little triangle way on the right. This is not in the instructions, so I'm just showing you this. If you come to this later and you don't remember what I'm telling you, just ask me. Over here are some other things I could turn on or off. There's a lot of things. I could turn on an entire view group, which has rotating and zooming and all that. The one I'm looking at, I think it's in the selection group. The ones I'm talking about, yeah. If you go to the selection group, now that selection group is turned on. There's a check mark here where my cursor is. But I don't have everything in the selection group turned on. I have some things turned on, like type filters and inner part links and things like that. But in the selection group, a little ways down, is allow selection of hidden wireframe and highlight hidden edges. I have those turned on. There's check marks there. So I'll do that again. If you don't have those two, say you've got deselect all, you see that up there, right? And you see the trap things, the 3D box and that, right? But you don't see those, go to that little triangle way on the right. They're in the selection group. The selection group is on if you see those, because if I turn that off, they don't see anything, right? So the selection group should be on if you see those filters and all that. But inside the selection group, there's more things in there that you can turn on or off. And you can see I got a lot of things I just don't have on. But I do have deselect all. And then down here is allow selection of hidden wireframe. If you turn that on, that one shows up. All right. So let me make the last, I'm almost done. Let me make the other two. And again, in my instructions, it just says repeat steps H, I, and J to create another point and a line and a tube. So let's see, we were in the point, so here in curve, I go to point. We parallel this point, actually we did parallel, we did a point on curve. That's the curve. Start point was that point, and it's going down, what did I just say, 27.5. Okay. There it is, and then real quickly after that we made a line. The line was starting at a point, but then it was at an angle to that guy in the middle there, that guy right there that I can pick because I have that setting. Okay, and this 2 was, what did we do last time? 30? Yeah. That whole short-term memory, you know, it's just like a few seconds ago. There we go. Right, and then one more tube on there. On that, it's already 7 because that was the last one I did. The preview to make sure. There we go. And then the last step is to trim some stuff. Now we could use trim body, or we could use trim sheet. All right, they would both work. Because you know, I'm just talking about this for a second. Because trim body, you do pick a body. It does say select body, and then down here you pick face as well. A sheet body is a body, and those solids, those tubes, they have faces. So I could use that. What I have you use in the surface tab, I have you use trim sheet. Okay, the target is a sheet body. One difference is trim sheet, you're always trimming a sheet body. It's part of the name, trim sheet. Okay, the boundary objects can be different things. It says object, right? So anyway, let me just do it first of all. Here's the target. All right, and then for the boundary, I have it set the body faces. Okay, so if I pick one of the faces of that, pick every face. I'm saying this just because there's a message that comes up, an alert. It says 1 or more boundary objects do not trim the selected target sheet body. Okay, that kind of scares you, but what that's saying is you're trying to trim that green thing right there with all the orange faces. Well, this orange face and this orange face over on this side, it's not hitting it. It's okay, that's what it's telling us, though. It's, well, you picked every face on that body. I could have done tangent faces, then it wouldn't have picked the end ones, and that would have worked too. But that's all that message is saying. You know, some of those aren't really even hitting it. That's okay. It's not hurting anything. Now, I could hit OK, and I would create a trim sheet in the tree, in the navigator. But you can also pick more than one boundary object. So I'm just going to do them all at once. And I get the same message because I'm picking all the faces, and the end faces aren't hitting it. I'll just hit OK. And it looks like it didn't do anything, but that's only because it didn't hide those things. All that's left is just, you know, pick some of this stuff and hide it. I could have done it probably faster in the navigator. And so on. So you see that it truly did trim it. I just wanted to say one thing about trim sheet versus trim body. Trim sheet, it's a lot more flexible when you got a bunch of regions. Like you might have one sheet body and you got maybe a bunch of sketches with all kinds of lines and arcs on it, and you can use that sketch trim to do a pretty complicated trim in a sheet body. You can't really do that as easily with a trim body. Trim sheet's a lot more flexible. However, Jim would know this, they don't recommend using trim sheet because it's not as stable, because when you make changes later on, sometimes the side that you trimmed gets flip-flopped and it trims the wrong side if you make a change. So trim body is more stable, but trim sheet's more flexible. For my exercise, I have used trim sheet. It's good to have practice with it. All right. So I'm actually done. I just want to remind you one more thing. I just feel like hiding all those lines and curves. Remember, a fast way to hide a bunch of things by type is go to View. There's this thing called Show and Hide. Say, let me hide all the solid bodies or the sheet bodies, whatever you got in your file will be listed here somewhere. And there's one called curves. I want to hide all those. And every one of them just got hidden, see? And there's one called points. I want to hide all those. So that's a fast way of hiding everything by a certain type. if you want to hide it, you didn't have to, but there's that. So if I go to the Assembly Navigator and I want to make sure I save everything, I'll make the assembly the work part, and then I'll hit save. But actually, before I do that, another reminder: if you look at my navigator here in the Assembly Navigator, I have these diskettes for the read-only column. Remember I talked about that before. When I opened up this assembly, it didn't really fully load everything. I never did really fully load the inputs or the outputs. There's little dash squares there. That means you never really had them open, or you never had them fully loaded. I obviously never had them open, because if you make something, if you open something, make it the work part, that fully loads it, right? So now that one's loaded. But just seeing squares there, dash squares, that's kind of evidence before you go to save something. That's evidence that there's nothing in there you possibly change, because they've never been the work part since you've had this assembly on. Okay, just a reminder what some of these symbols are. But again, back to what I was saying. If you make the assembly the work part, then anything that you did in any of the children will be saved if you hit this guy, because it says it saves the work part and any modified components. And that's the same one as this one. Okay. Well, the only thing I really modified was the body set, and I just saved that. All right. That's an easy one, huh?
Yeah. Hey, how come you can't go normal to a surface in an X?
Did it not let you do that? I thought. Let me, because that is, there's an option for normal.
Yeah, I'll pick a surface though.
Yeah, let me show. Oh, it doesn't, did you try it?
I think I've tried it
Maybe
multiple
that's
times.
why, because it doesn't let you. Oh, I got to rename stuff, so there's a point. So I'll make a line.
I hope it works here, because then you can show me
Let
what's on it.
me actually show my extracted body too, because that's,
Because in CATIA, you can go normal to a surface, right? With
yeah,
a line?
yeah. So there's that, so let's do the line. Point. Try normal. Let me put that, yeah, if it's flat. Well, actually, not even if it's flat. If it was curved, it would be normal at that point.
I'm gonna have to try that, like well,
Well, let's see, let me make sure.
work in the KBE settings, so I wonder if they've shut that option off.
Could be. Maybe they don't want, yeah, because maybe the
They don't
surface,
want you- that wouldn't
the
be
surface
robust
could
modeling.
change, and then your direction's gonna change, and you didn't want it to. Yeah.
Because I've tried that 100 times and never, like, what is going on here? And I have to, now I'll have to change
Oh.
environments.
Is the normal on the menu?
Yeah.
Is it on that pull
Normal
down?
all
It
the
just
time, you get a
doesn't let-
message, it doesn't
Well,
let you
I
do
don't
it.
know, that's weird.
But it could be in those, because of those KBE settings, I know
Yeah.
they've changed a lot of things.
It might be. Yeah. I was gonna say something else too while we were talking. I forgot what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I always create a plan.
Oh, I know what I was gonna say. I think the reason I did it that way is because when I started this class a long time ago, it was CATIA, and it was from a guy that worked at Chrysler. And I think that's what he did, so I did the same thing that he did.
Now I gotta find out.
Yeah,
If it's-
try it.
if it's
Try
in
it at Chrysler.
The KBE environment or the vehicle environment. I don't want they don't have it, but this is just, and, you know, we have the environments.
This is out of the box, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even
Yeah.
just double click on NX to start it, right? You use that. You still have the start center, they call it the start center, yeah. Yeah, that's different than what we have here. We
But I
just have
think
out of the
it's-
box NX, wherever they load, when you go to a command, we have a choice of more or less.
Yeah, we have
that's it.
more or less in KBE, well,
Yeah.
more or less in KBE.
Yeah. That's all customized stuff. You
Yeah.
guys get. You get that.
But now
fancy.
now I have to try that.
Tell them, hey, you guys, turn it back on.
I hate to admit, it's been years, and this is the first time I've ever thought to ask the question.
Yeah.